This is not so much a lecture as it is an inquiry. I want to try to bring together some of the readings that we did for this week, and also some of the things that you said in class. I think before we can talk about ways of ethically persuading each other, that we need to think about what it means to even be persuaded and what happens when we're persuaded. Again, I'm not that interested in getting a hard and fast definition, because I think we have some sense of what's going on. But I think that we need to be able to take some sort of position as critics, as viewers of argument. We mentioned several things in class about how persuasion can happen. I think the clenched fist is an example of threat or intention. It has been used for a very, very long time to indicate the potential for violence. Often this results from a long-standing attempt to change an issue or a law. And in any case, the fist seems to indicate the threat. Sometimes, however, the threat goes further, and we aren't simply indicating that we are going to persuade on the basis of a threat. We could resort to violence, and the fist is just an example of that kind of violence. But sometimes we actually punch each other. I think that this particular picture depicts the sort of stereotype sort of brawl. One wonders if the red cheeks don't indicate a certain amount of alcohol having been involved. Shirts are off. You've got fairly well-matched individuals, and both are using their fists to settle a score. Probably not a score that is particularly serious, or at least not in the sense of culturally so. A little removed from that is a form of aggression that is really done through the mouth, that is yelling at each other. I think that it's pretty clear in looking at these two guys that there's a lot of anger. They're very, very close to each other. And I think that that sort of experience, if you've never had it, is probably capable of getting as much adrenaline to pump as is the fist fight. But it is at least removed one step from the throwing a punch. Then removed even further, but perhaps even more effective, is the snake oil salesman. This is something we think of as long ago, but clearly we're sold all sorts of things via television and via various ways. The assumption that we normally make about the snake oil salesman is that they're selling us something that doesn't work, and that isn't, they aren't telling the truth. So somehow the way that they're selling it is very persuasive, but the product itself is not a good product. We, of course, have to consider the possibility in persuasion that someone can sell in this way, but the product they're selling could be a perfectly legitimate product. Now, I think that Gerard Hauser really invites us to look at rhetoric, or the situation that might create persuasion, as more of an event rather than a thing out there sitting in time. He says, rhetoric involves the actions of humans seeking agreement on their interpretations. Now, when you get these definitions, I think you have to pay attention to every concept. So rhetoric involves actions of humans, so actions, not so much other things, of humans, not other animals, who are seeking agreement, so he's positing a lack of agreement, and then on their interpretations. Notice that this isn't on facts or preferences. These are interpretations. So each of those concepts is going to be very important to Hauser. So actions of other people who seek to find agreement on how we interpret the world. For Hauser, this is an eventful rhetoric. It doesn't take place in a static spot. It's not a speech. It's not something we can look back on. It's a series of events over time. And a couple of things he mentions I think are very important, which I think that the fist fights and the yelling somehow indicate very, very well, which is that rhetoric results because of discontinuities. If everything makes sense, then we don't need to seek agreement because we already have agreement. In addition, we have the notion of contingency. Our behaviors, our decisions are contingent upon the details or situations that we face. It's much harder to answer a question, would you be willing to hit another person? It's much harder to answer that question than it is, would you ever spank your child? Which I think is a fairly specific situation. We've identified the person, we've identified the type of hitting, and we've contextualized the relationship. That has a big effect on the questions. So contingency has to do with those situations. Discontinuities, we don't really have an occasion to talk about these issues unless there is something that happens that brings to our attention that we don't have agreement. Now, I think that we can all think of examples where neither of these things were present, but I don't necessarily want to deny that these things don't exist, so much as I want to say that they're probably not really rhetorical in the sense that we're talking about in the class. In addition, we also have the example from one of our readings of the rhetoric as exemplar, and this is Edwin Black's essay. He says, but beyond the speech, confirming our approval, is its capacity to live as an influence. So notice he moves away from Hauser. Actually doesn't move away, Hauser's after him. But for Black, rhetoric is the thing. It's the reified object, i.e. the text. This is going to be very common from his time period. And it's not so much that we have to get, it doesn't just have to confirm our approval. It doesn't just have to say, yes, we agree with this and it's doing a good thing. But it has to live in perpetuity. It has to last. Now, I think the thing that's interesting is that this contrasts very starkly with Hauser's notion, because Hauser sees things contingently. Black is arguing that we can get out of the situation and the speech still has an impact. We also have the notion of rhetoric as a monument, and this is Blair, Jeppesen, and Pucci. They say, in other words, it is inclusive. It does not suggest one reading or the other, but embraces even contradictory interpretations. For them, rhetoric is all about the interpreter, the person who observes, and the observer must always be allowed to tolerate contradictory interpretations. And I think, in addition, they're writing specifically about the Vietnam Memorial. So now we have something that we're looking at besides words in a situation. We're looking at a literal thing, a piece of marble. Further, they say the critic becomes an interventionist. By this, I think they're meaning the critic plays a role in how the monument can be received and can be understood. It seems to me then that we have several concepts when we're talking about these notions of changing our mind. And again, this gets back to some things that you guys said in class. Persuasion, coercion, discipline, accommodation. I'm sure there are many other words that we could use. Discipline is a set of rules that we can form our behavior to. It may be because we're in the military, or it may be because we're at school or in some sort of other institution, but most times we're either children or we've agreed to undergo these rules. Accommodation, I think, is that there are times when I'm willing to let someone believe what they want to believe and do what they want to do, even though I don't agree with them. I accommodate their view. I stay out of their way. Tolerance might be another word for that. Coercion seems to be that sense that I'm going to bribe you in some way. If you do this, then I'll give you something else. I'll use guilt. I'll make you feel bad. You know, a variety of ways that we can be coerced. It strikes me then that we're talking about a variety of different things when we're talking about persuasion. I think that we can change our minds. We can change our actions, and we can change our feelings. And we can combine these in various ways. We might change our minds and our feelings about something. So I'm going to change my mind about being a messy person. I'm going to be neater. And I'm going to start feeling badly about mess. But that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to make my bed in the morning. Conversely, I can change my actions. I can make my bed in the morning because I'm under a disciplinary environment that says if you don't make your bed, you don't get your allowance. That may not change my mind or my feelings about making the bed. I want to then have you think about what it is that we're talking about when we're talking about persuasion and rhetoric. What role a variety of things have in this process. If rhetoric is an event, and it's a position that I find very helpful, it strikes me that we've got to consider a lot of different aspects of that event in order to talk about a fair or good or appropriate sort of event. We've got to think about the ways in which our mind is being accessed. So we might use rules of rationality, and those are very many and broad. We might think in terms of our behavior. So putting my face up next to your face and yelling very, very loudly, we might consider to have a sort of effect that we don't appreciate. We might also consider that just because we are able to change people's behaviors doesn't mean we've actually changed them. And I think that that can be very important in some situations. And then further, I think we need to think about feelings and emotions and the way in which those are relevant and the ways in which we want to affect emotions and the ways in which we want to stay away from these. So again, this is just talking out loud about some of the things we've read. And just as an aside, clearly Parrish is very similar to Black in that he sees intrinsic worth in text, and I didn't mention that earlier, so text itself. I want us to move away in this class from the concept, and I don't think anyone has expressed it so far, that rhetoric or persuasion is a text. I want us to definitely think about eventfulness. I also, however, want us to think about memorials, physical architectural sorts of rhetorical situations. Well, let me know if you have questions about these readings or if you have comments about the readings, and thanks a lot.